Hi, this is a Brexit update from CE Transport Law. We're just going to explore how Brexit is going to affect haulage and trade in terms of where we're up to now. So I'll give you a little bit about the background to Brexit, the current position, the progress through the transition period, and any solutions or preparations that you should be thinking about. I've set it out as a bit of a timeline, starting, of course, with our exit from the European Union on the 31st of January this year with the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. The next day, we, of course, entered the transitional period or transition period. We're still in the customs union and the single market until the end of this year. According to the withdrawal agreement, the UK had until the end of this month, so June, to formally request an extension of the Brexit transit period. So would we be able to do a deal this year, or would we need to extend it beyond? In my view, it was hoped by last year, at least, even by those who'd voted to remain, that we would be able to do a deal by the end of this year. And there are two principal reasons for that. The first is the argument that any delay of the transition period would, of course, delay the goal of controlling our own borders. The second reason is, of course, the cost implications of remaining in the EU, something which some of us, most of us, were keen to avoid. So what should we have in place by the end of this year? Well, we should have either a free trade agreement, which has been negotiated and agreed between us and the 27 member states. Great. If we've got that, we all know what we're doing. Or we may crash out, as some are describing it, with the World Trade Organization terms. So what has happened next? Well, what we expected to happen is that there would then be this transition of compromise between stakeholders and the government, who would then go back to the European leaders to negotiate our position and indeed try and achieve the best possible position for us. Then on the 23rd of March, there was the beginning of lockdown. Now, this, of course, meant that most of the government's departments which had been settled on negotiating our exit were then deployed into COVID planning. This means that for some, there has been very little external stakeholder contribution, and as a result, perhaps, if you believe what you read in the papers, this means that negotiations between us and the EU thus far have not managed to settle terms or make very much in the way of progress. So whilst the government departments have been mostly distracted by the pandemic, there have been intervening events of public importance. So if we just go through those in date order, on the 19th of May, this is perhaps only of interest to those of you who are in an arrangement, the UK government published their own draft free trade agreement for public scrutiny. If you need to get an early night, then this is a good place to start. This is a 300-page document which just sets out what we think the key terms should be, and this is our starting point for negotiations. That was an important date because it really set out what our position would be publicly. For those of you who don't have the time or inclination to wade through that lot, there is an accompanying letter with it, which is also in the public domain, which just sets out in brief what we say the position is and why we want the terms that we do. So that was the 19th of May. The next date I've looked at is the 11th of June. And why have we looked at that date? Well, this is probably only relevant to those of you who are doing business with Northern Ireland. On that date, HMRC published a questionnaire for those businesses who are moving goods between GB and Northern Ireland, because of course at the end of this transition period, the Northern Ireland Protocol will bite, and there's going to be some changes to the way that we do business with Northern Ireland. They're trying to get people to sign up to this questionnaire, partly I think so they have your information, because particularly if you're not VAT registered, there are a huge number of hauliers and operators who may perhaps not be in the loop about what's going on and how that trade deal is progressing. It's hoped, of course, that any trade disruption will be kept to a minimum for those trading with Northern Ireland, but there will be some changes. So if you're doing business in Northern Ireland, it might be an idea to sign up for the questionnaire and thereafter receive their information. That was the 11th of June, and the following day, perhaps more importantly, was the second meeting of the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee. This was held by video conference. And importantly, the UK decided and made public the fact that we will leave the EU on the 31st of December 2020. And by that specifically, I mean we will not seek to remain part of the single market or the customs union. There were a number of publications and headlines posted very quickly thereafter, which set out that the UK was backtracking on plans for full border checks. But of course, we have to bear in mind that it's very likely that any negotiated agreement will be bilateral or symmetrical. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We will have to accept a number of concessions this side in order to gain ground over the water. So what the government are saying is that they are trying to avoid friction and delay at the borders, and in order to achieve that, they are going to take a pragmatic and flexible approach to non-controlled goods. So what does that involve? Well, from January, they're suggesting that traders importing standard goods, so that's just about everything from clothes to electronics, they need to prepare for what they're describing as basic custom requirements. So they will need some record, you will need a customs declaration, but the actual checks of those goods will be sporadic. Certainly that's what they're saying at the moment. The control goods like alcohol and tobacco will continue as described. There is effectively a phasing in of the goods checks, which they expect to deal with what is an enormous increase in the volume of traffic caused by delay from the 1st of January. A few days later, on the 15th of June, we know that there was a meeting of the Prime Minister and the President of the European Council and others, again confirming that we are not going to extend the transition period. So we are out of the customs union one way or the other at the end of this year. So what does that mean? Well, over the next month, it means that the negotiations must intensify. The longer it takes to settle the free trade agreement, the less likely it is that there will be one. Because after the agreement is put in place, of course, it has to be ratified by all of the member states, and there has to be an opportunity for us and for the member states to prepare for implementation. So, I'll give you a little bit of a summary. Where are we up to now? Well, we've completed the 4 phases of the negotiations. We know that the reports in media as to the progress that's been made there have not been encouraging, but whether you believe what's reported in the media is a matter for you. They are going to now enter an intense period of negotiation, and what we're hoping as an industry is that This will include greater collaboration with key stakeholders like the FTA and major global players that have bases here in the UK in order to improve our footing and the information that's going to government and then, of course, to the negotiating table. The UK global tariff is going to replace the EU common external tariff, which means that all tariffs below 2% are going to be scrapped, which is a good news in terms of an administrative burden. And you also need to look out for the VAT postponement implications which come in from January, but I haven't explored it in any further detail here. So how long have we got? Well, it could go right down to the wire, of course. It should have been done by the 1st of July. We know they're going into this intense period now of trying to do a deal, but the reality is that it could go on for many more months. What do we actually know? So what is certain? Well, what we know is that we're out of the customs union at the end of this year, and so that means one way or another, customs formalities will apply to trade with the EU. It's estimated there are 50 million declarations, that's customs declarations today. So the increase by some estimations is going to be fivefold. That's 250 million customs declarations by the new year. There are also going to be safety and security declarations on top of those figures, although they're likely to be similar in terms of the data. They go to different places, and so organisations will have to have both. What else do we know? We know that there is going to be potentially a shortage of customs staff. Efforts to recruit customs staff and get them trained, of course, have been disrupted by COVID-19. The last time we had customs formalities in place was 1993, for those who can remember, when there was significantly fewer goods and more boots on the ground. What's this going to involve for you? Well, what that means, of course, is that there are going to be delays, at least initially, potentially for months and possibly years at the docks. Prepare for that. Build in time and add that into your costings. What don't we know? Well, we don't know which way it's going to go yet. Is there going to be a free trade agreement, or are we going to be on WTO terms? That's the big question next. Now we know we're coming out. We know there's not going to be an extension. That is the next question that we need an answer to so we can start implementing preparations. What do you need to know, or what do you need to do? It's good advice to sign up to these updates. I know sometimes they can be pretty tedious, but if you are involved, like the 250,000 other SMEs in the UK, in doing business exclusively with the European Union, this is going to affect you, and it's going to affect you in 6 months' time. It's estimated that a huge proportion of those operators have thus far done very little to prepare for the customs union exit, and it is going to take time because there are a number of considerations for you. Let's have a think about some of those. Well, currently, most small and medium enterprises at least will have data or requests for work coming in from a number of sources. You've got telephone requests, you've got email, you've got web-based requests. What are you going to do with that data? How are you going to turn it into a customs declaration? You need to think about how you are going to handle data. So what do you need to do to prepare for Brexit or the departure from the customs union? There must be some foreplanning. It's estimated that there are 250,000 SMEs currently trading within Europe, and that a large proportion of those businesses have made no preparations for Brexit. It's something everybody needs to be thinking about, because what we do know now is it's coming. There has to be resource planning. Are you going to need additional resource? Are you going to need more vehicles? Is it going to have an effect on your costs? But you also need to be thinking about some data and technical solutions. You're going to have data or requests coming in for a number of sources potentially. So that's telephone, web, email. What are you going to do to turn all of these requests into customs declarations? Are you going to go for an automated system? Is it going to be manual? And partly that's going to be dictated to by the volume of goods that you're moving within the European Union. But certainly you need to be looking at systems and the cost implications and time frames involved in accommodating those systems to your current working practice. So what's next? Well, we expect that there will be further information in the press after the 1st of July, because that was, of course, the first anticipated deadline for the negotiations to conclude. As they intensify, I think what's more likely is that over the coming months, as we reach the third phase of the government's proposed exit from the lockdown, we're going to see an increasing amount of news around Brexit and increased government resource switched or moved from contingency COVID-19 planning to Brexit planning. What if there is no trade deal agreed by July, August, September? Well, the UK then, of course, faces the prospect of tariffs on exports from the European Union, and you can see more information about what those tariffs might be and what the effect of that will be on your business very much in the public domain. So you need to be preparing for that. The next thing I'd like from you is a little bit of feedback. This is the first presentation we've done by way of video conferencing. Is it useful? Is it too long? Is it too short? Drop me an email, or you can contact me through the website. If it's useful, we'll run some more. If not, then let me know. I hope that you are all safe and well. Thank you for listening, and the very best of luck to you, your families, and of course your business. If we can help you going forward with any operator licensing issues that you have in light of the COVID-19 planning, pandemic, or indeed in light of Brexit, then get in touch with us through the website. Thank you.